Hey guys, welcome back to Standard Time. Today we're taking a look at the Grand Seiko Snowflake. Now, I'm pretty sure that you'd agree that this is one of the most beautiful dials you've ever seen on a watch. Now, this watch is particularly special because I think that it's really the one that drew all the attention towards Grand Seiko that there is right now worldwide. So this is quite possibly the most important watch I believe Grand Seiko will have made once we go into the future and look back, because it's the one that brought all the attention towards the brand, especially in the West. Grand Seiko is by no means something new. It's not a new manufacturer. They've been around since the 1960s, so over 60 years now, and they've been innovating all along. They're the first ones to come out with this quartz mechanical movement that we see in this watch, which is known as the spring drive, and they launched that in 1999. So they've really been ahead of most companies in terms of innovation. Now, I'd like to give a quick plug to Ken Watches, as they're the ones who let me get a hands-on with this piece and most of the new watches on the channel. So they're a watch dealer in Hong Kong, and they do ship worldwide, so do check them out at kenwatches.com if you want some really cool pieces. One of the key things behind Grand Seiko is their philosophy behind making the watch. Now, I don't want to delve too much into the Japanese philosophy that makes things great, but the key idea is to make something to the best possible capacity that they can. So essentially, we're talking about the quality of the watch is supreme. It's absolutely supreme because they take so much care into the tiniest of details. If you know Zaratsu polishing, that's kind of what I'm referring to. Now, it's not just that they're precise. The spring drive movement was created to be extremely precise, and that's exactly what they achieved. It's both mechanical and quartz, but it's really more mechanical than quartz. So it's very different from mecha quartz, auto quartz. It's a thing on its own, and it's really special. Now, this particular watch, let's get on with the dimensions and the specifications. So the Snowflake has a case diameter of 41 millimeters. It has a case thickness of 12.5 millimeters and a lug to lug of just over 48 millimeters. Lug width at 20 millimeters. Now, that's proper dimensioning for a really nice watch on the wrist. But a key feature is that it's made out of titanium, so it will feel very different to almost any other watch you've had on your wrist. Generally, when you talk to watch enthusiasts, titanium is a love or hate relationship because a lot of people dislike titanium, myself included, unfortunately, because it just feels light on the wrist, and you generally have that innate association of light being cheap, which is absolutely not the case, but it's hard to stop yourself from making that association nevertheless. It's just quite a juxtaposition of intense quality, but at the same time a very light, and in terms of tangibility it doesn't feel all that great, even though it looks fantastic and the quality is absolutely there. But somehow that one factor of it being quite a bit lighter than what you'd expect makes it detrimental to the experience. If this watch were made in steel, it would definitely be the one I would lust after in the Grand Seiko range, but alas, it's not. Running along with the feel of the material in the hand, I've got to say that I'm not entirely impressed by this bracelet. It's a fantastic bracelet to look at, and as Adrian said in his recent video, which you've probably seen, it's nice, but the clasp is just not there, and I absolutely agree with him, because I don't really care too much about the taper. That's one of the things he really mentioned and he really cares about, and maybe you do, but that's not a priority for me. It's just the clasp leaves a lot to be desired, and it feels like they really did cheap out on the clasp despite having not done that. For some reason, the watch feels like it's from 2016, but the clasp really does feel like it's from 1980. Personally, I find it extremely difficult to place my own opinion on this watch because I loved it from the moment I saw it online and I saw it in videos until the moment I held it. So that kind of shattered my expectations behind the watch, but also I still love the design. The design is still there. That dial is unequivocally fantastic in the whole range and whole spectrum of watches out there. But then everything changes when you hold it. And when you want to own a watch, I think the tactility, in fact, is almost equally as important as the design cues. And that's the reason I'd say that I can't really place how I feel about this watch. You know, sometimes you look at watches and you go, yeah, I'm really going to own that at some point in time. I felt that way about this watch, but then I held it, and then there was this fight of, can I excuse the titanium because it's such a nice watch? But at the end of the day, why would you compromise when you're buying something so expensive? So for that reason, I wouldn't get this watch myself. But if you like titanium, then there's really no reason you wouldn't like this watch. It has perfect dimensions, and that movement is something to behold, because now we're going to get onto the spring drive and the beauty behind this 9R65 movement. Now, since we're talking about spring drive, I have to kind of explain the concept, even though more people have explained how spring drive works than people are willing to listen. But just in case you're not entirely sure, this is the basics. So let me just run through a simplistic explanation. Now, a mechanical watch, an automatic watch, has a rotor which then powers a mainspring, and this mainspring sits in a barrel, and it then uses the mechanical energy of the wound spring to power the rest of the movement, which is basically a balance wheel, which is a regulator of how accurate the watch is going to be and how quick it turns, essentially. So then you have spring drive. In spring drive, you still have the rotor and the mainspring. So it is using mechanical energy to power the watch. But then this mechanical energy is converted into electrical energy. Now, in order to regulate the watch, this system actually uses an electromagnetic brake, which is powered by electrical energy, of course, to actually stop the watch from spinning too fast or too slow. Typically, it would be too fast, so it would just slow down the glide wheel. So what I'm trying to say is spring drive is essentially genius in a watch. It might be a little bit quartzy, might not be to everyone's taste, but come on, it's still mechanical at heart. It still derives itself from mechanical energy, and that's the best thing in a mechanical watch, at least for me. Now, the first thing that actually hits you when you flip the watch around and look through that case back is the immaculate finishing of the movement. I mean, you expect no less from Grand Seiko given their reputation and the name behind of the watch they create. But it's more than that. The way they've done the case back finishing is to a standard that I didn't expect to see. The first thing that screams at you are those so-called Geneva stripes, but in this case, they're not Geneva stripes because Grand Seiko has its own method of creating that effect. And instead of using sanding paper, what they do is actually have a diamond cutter at an angle, which in a way kind of recesses out the material to create that overall stripe finish around its path. Now, this movement is absolutely mesmerizing, and you can just spend all your time staring at the case back and lose sense of time. But in terms of specifications, 72 hours power reserve and an accuracy of plus 1 second, plus or minus 1 second a day. That can only be achieved with spring drive, so that's why it's here. But 72 hours, not all that special for watches these days. Every new watch has at least 70 hours, so it has been ahead of the curve because it's the same movement for the last 6 sort of years now. But on the other hand, you do have the caliber 9R01, which is a manual wind 8-day power reserve Grand Seiko movement. So there is a balance across the range of Grand Seiko watches. One of the key special things of this movement is the way the seconds hand just glides across the dial. Now, that's because it doesn't really have a balance spring which oscillates back and forth, and it has the quartz oscillator, which is so much higher in terms of frequency than any mechanical movement. So typically quartzes have that tick, but they've incorporated the sweep into this movement, and it's so smooth. There isn't another movement that's not a spring drive that you'll see with such a smooth sweep. So we covered the movement, we covered the dial. We didn't really cover the hands, but you've seen the hands enough through this video. They're fantastic. Zaratsu, thank you. And that blued second hand, heat blued, also nice detail. But 2021, is this watch really still all that relevant in 2021? And the short answer is absolutely. It may have released about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, and it's the watch that really brought the hype to Grand Seiko. So this is one watch from Grand Seiko that will never be forgotten, and it will never be less beautiful. If you can get over that titanium, or whether maybe you like the titanium, then there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't consider this watch in 2021, 2022, or maybe even 2030. So that's been it, guys. Thank you for watching this video. Stay subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.